So imagine a sound that is just so smooth, so, I don't know, sophisticated, that the guy who created it literally described it as sounding like a dry martini.
Yeah, which is just an incredible way to describe a musical tone.
It really is.
Yeah.
And he wasn't just being poetic, you know. He engineered that exact sound to become one of the primary architects of cool jazz, and specifically West Coast jazz.
Right, we are talking about the legendary alto saxophonist Paul Desmond.
Exactly. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are tearing into this massive biographical stack of sources today to figure out how a guy who honestly actively despised loud, aggressive playing somehow managed to compose Take 5, which is the highest-selling jazz single in history.
It is such a phenomenal contradiction. I mean, you have this deeply intellectual, intensely self-deprecating artist who preferred to play at the volume of a whisper, basically.
Yeah.
And he's operating in this era that was completely defined by speed and fury and volume. We're looking at a life that really proves how understated brilliance can sometimes just completely drown out the loudest people in the room.
Which is something I think you, the listener, could probably take a lot away from, especially navigating our modern screaming culture today.
Totally.
But to understand how he built that whole cool aesthetic, we have to start with his foundation, which, surprisingly, was not calm at all.
No, not even a little bit.
Right. Because Paul Emil Breitenfeld, which was his birth name, was born in San Francisco on November 25th, 1924, into a household that just sounds incredibly chaotic.
Chaotic is definitely the right word for it.
Yeah.
He was born into this fascinating, really complex cultural mix. So there's this genealogical research done by his cousin, the composer Fred Barton.
Oh, right. I saw that in the sources.
Yeah, and Barton traced his paternal lineage back to a Bohemian Jewish medical doctor, Dr. Sigmund Breitenfeld from Kamenechi, who emigrated to New York way back in 1885.
Wow, okay.
Now, the family didn't actually practice Judaism during Paul's childhood, but there was this documented lineage of musicians in every single generation dating back to the 1800s.
Which totally explains the dad.
Exactly. His father, Emil, was a pianist, an organist, and an arranger. He even composed a famous World War I soldier song called The Last Long Mile while he was training in Plattsburgh.
That's amazing. But then on his mother's side, Shirley King, he had this Irish Catholic heritage.
Right. But tragically, his mother suffered from really severe emotional instability and intense obsessive-compulsive disorder throughout his entire upbringing.
Wait, yeah, let's pause on that, because the sources say her health crises were so severe that when Desmond was just a kid, around 1933, he was sent all the way across the country to live with relatives in New Rochelle, New York.
Yeah, for nearly 5 years.
That sounds profoundly traumatic. I mean, how does a kid dealing with that level of displacement and, family instability cultivate this incredibly relaxed, soothing musical persona later on?
Well, it's actually a psychological mechanism we see in a lot of artists. When your external environment is entirely out of your control, you tend to create a microscopic world that you can control, absolutely.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
For Desmond, that world was music. He started on the clarinet at age 12. With that, he could control the air, the pitch, the tone. The calmness in his music wasn't a reflection of a calm life. It was a refuge from a chaotic one.
That makes a ton of sense. But he didn't actually want to play wind instruments at first, did he?
No, he desperately wanted to play the violin.
Right. And his dad completely shut it down. He warned him that violinists were a dime a dozen and told him flat out, you'll starve.
The classic pragmatic parent versus the artistic child dynamic.
It's so relatable. It's exactly like a modern parent looking at their kid today and saying, do not get a liberal arts degree. You're going to end up living in my basement. Go learn to code.
Yeah, the 1930s equivalent of learn to code was stick to the reed instruments.
Stick to the reeds. So he played clarinet through his time at San Francisco Polytechnic High School, where he also showed this massive talent for writing, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He co-edited the school paper. He even got to interview comedian Bob Hope.
Which is crazy for a high schooler.
Right. And then he eventually enrolled at San Francisco State College as an English major. But during his freshman year, he finally adopted the alto saxophone.
And the sources mention that his literary background directly influenced how he played the sax. Like, I kept seeing phrases like, he structured his solos like paragraphs. But what does that actually mean mechanically? How does music mimic grammar?
Well, think about what was popular at the time. Bebop was completely taking over.
Right. So fast and loud.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You had Charlie Parker playing these blistering, aggressive, endless strings of notes. It's like a massive run-on sentence delivered by a fast-talking auctioneer.
Yeah.
But Desmond took it in the exact opposite direction. When we say he played in paragraphs, we mean he treated a musical motif like a thesis statement. He would play a short, melodic idea, and then he would just stop.
Just silence.
Yeah, he would use rests and silence, the exact same way a writer uses commas and periods. He allowed the listener's brain to actually process the phrase before he introduced the next one. He was heavily influenced by the relaxed, linear phrasing of guys like Lester Young and Lee Konitz, really focusing on that smooth, vibrato, light tone.
That's fascinating. But just as he's starting to build this unique musical vocabulary, history taps him on the shoulder. It's 1943, he's drafted into the U.S. Army and assigned to the 253rd Army Band in San Francisco.
Yep.
He never sees combat, but he spends 3 years doing intense sight reading and ensemble work. And then in 1944, he sits in on an audition for a young pianist named Dave Brubeck.
And I mean, that audition changed the entire trajectory of 20th century music. Desmond listened to Brubeck play and was just entirely thrown off guard.
Because Brubeck wasn't playing normal stuff, right?
Not at all. He wasn't playing standard swing piano. He was throwing down these really heavy, adventurous, almost classical-leaning chord changes. Brubeck passed the audition, obviously, but the Army immediately shipped him overseas to Europe, which separated them until after the war.
So when the war ends in 1946, Paul Emil Breitenfeld decides he needs a new name for his civilian jazz career. He legally changes his surname to Desmond.
Right, which the sources say was inspired by a Glenn Miller Band vocalist named Johnny Desmond.
Yeah, he thought the name sounded smooth and uncommon, which is very on brand. And with this new identity, he starts embedding himself in the Northern California jazz scene. He occasionally plays with Brubeck, but then the relationship completely explodes.
Oh, it gets remarkably petty.
It really does. So Desmond leads a small combo at a venue called the Bandbox, and he actually hires Brubeck. But they get into an argument, Desmond resigns, and then he goes out of his way to actively block Brubeck from taking over the residency.
Yeah, he effectively burned the bridge to the ground and just left to tour with another band.
He torpedoes Brubeck's gig. But then, a few months later, Desmond hears Brubeck playing on the radio, realizes he made a massive mistake, and decides to go fix it. But here's the part I just don't get.
Okay.
Brubeck is furious. He tells his wife, Iola, under no circumstances is Paul Desmond allowed in their house. Desmond shows up anyway. Dave Brubeck is in the backyard, literally hanging cloth diapers on a laundry line.
Yep, the glamour of a jazz musician's life.
Right. And Iola defies her husband's orders. She lets Desmond inside, and Desmond somehow talks his way not just back into Brubeck's good graces, but into a wildly lucrative partnership. When they form the Dave Brubeck Quartet in 1951, Desmond's contract says he gets 20% of all profits and can never be fired.
Never be fired.
How do you steal a man's gig, show up while he's doing laundry, and walk away with a sweetheart contract like that?
It's wild, but it's because Brubeck was a pragmatist when it came to the music. He knew, despite his anger, that they possessed this almost telepathic musical empathy. They needed each other to balance out their extremes.
Okay, what do you mean by extremes?
Well, Brubeck's piano style was intensely heavy. It was highly polyrhythmic and really blocky in its chordal approach.
Break that down for me. When you say polyrhythmic and blocky, it kind of sounds like Brubeck is just slamming his hands on the keys.
I mean, he essentially was, but with incredible mathematical precision. So a polyrhythm is when you play two conflicting rhythms at the exact same time.
Like rubbing your stomach and patting your head.
Yes, exactly. So Brubeck's left hand might be playing in a 3-beat waltz time while his right hand is hammering out a 4-beat march. It creates this incredibly dense, thunderous wall of sound.
So it's almost like a heavyweight boxer sparring with a ballet dancer. Brubeck is throwing these heavy, mathematically complex, grounded punches, and Desmond is just floating around the ring untouched.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. If Brubeck had a heavy sax player, the music would just turn to mud. He needed Desmond's ethereal, floating alto sax to act as a foil. That tension between the heavyweight and the ballet dancer is what made the quartet work.
And it launches them into the stratosphere. I mean, throughout the 50s, the Dave Brubeck Quartet becomes a commercial juggernaut. They're touring colleges, which was pretty revolutionary at the time, recording iconic live albums like Jazz at Oberlin. By 1954, Dave Brubeck's face is on the cover of Time magazine.
Yeah, they were massive.
But as the band expands, that delicate tension between heavy and light flares up again, this time with a new drummer.
Right. So in 1956, drummer Joe Morello joins the group. And ironically, Desmond was actually the one who recommended him.
Which he probably regretted immediately.
Oh, he did, because Desmond's ideal rhythm section was what he called a tinky boom background. You know, very subtle, very quiet, just keeping time so we could float over it. But Morello was a powerhouse. He was a master of dynamic, highly complex, aggressive solos, and Brubeck loved it.
Naturally.
Yeah, at Morello's first gig, Brubeck gave him an extended solo, the crowd gave a standing ovation, and Desmond was so furious he threatened to quit right there.
Yeah, I read about this one gig in Hanover, Germany in 1958. They're playing Take the A Train, and Morello starts going off on one of his massive rhythmic tangents. Desmond gets so irritated that he stages a passive-aggressive protest on stage.
Yeah, he either plays so quietly you can barely hear him, or he just drops out completely and stands there in silence while Morello plays.
Honestly, it sounds like being at a very sophisticated, quiet dinner party, and suddenly the guy next to you pulls out a megaphone to tell a story about his golf game. You would just sit there in silent, judgmental protest, too.
A lot of bands would have broken up over that megaphone. But the paradox here is that forcing these opposing forces into the studio is actually what birthed their masterpiece. In 1959, they record the album Time Out.
The legendary album.
Right, and the entire concept is exploring unorthodox time signatures. Desmond writes a track for it in 5/4 meter called Take 5.
Okay, I need a simple explanation on 5/4 time, because I know most pop music we listen to on the radio is in 4/4 time. You tap your foot. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's totally predictable. What does adding that fifth beat actually do to the listener's brain?
Well, it makes your brain stumble, basically, but in the best way possible. When you tap your foot to 4/4, your body expects a resolution. A measure in 5/4 time, which is usually counted as 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, it never resolves where your ear expects it to.
It just keeps rolling.
Exactly. It creates this perpetual off-balance feeling. It forces you to lean forward into the music because the groove keeps resetting just a little bit early.
And underneath that stumbling groove, Brubeck is playing this really heavy ostinato.
Right. An ostinato is just a stubborn, repeating musical phrase. So Brubeck plays the exact same 2 chords over and over, anchoring the song. Morello plays this hypnotic drum vamp. And because that rhythmic bed is so dense and repetitive, Desmond just glides over it with his sinuous, unforgettable melody.
And that contrast turns it into a global phenomenon. I mean, it becomes the first jazz single in history to sell 1 million copies.
Which is insane for the time.
Over 1 million copies for an instrumental jazz song in 5/4 time. It's wild. Now, I want to talk about how he physically produced that melody, because the gear he used really matters here. He achieved that famous dry martini tone using a Selmer Super Action alto saxophone paired with an MC Gregory mouthpiece.
Right.
Why does a specific mouthpiece change the fundamental sound of a saxophone that much?
Well, it all comes down to acoustics and fluid dynamics. Inside a saxophone mouthpiece, there is a space called the chamber and a slope called the baffle. Most players who want to be loud, like rock and roll saxophonists, for example, they use a mouthpiece with a high baffle and a large chamber.
To push more air.
Exactly. It pushes the air fast and creates a bright, buzzing sound that really cuts through a band. But the MC Gregory mouthpiece Desmond used had a medium chamber and a very specific baffle shape that suppressed all those buzzing overtones.
So it's literally filtering out the harsh frequencies before the sound even hits the horn.
Precisely. And that physical resistance allowed Desmond to completely master the altissimo register.
Which is the super high notes, right?
Yeah, the altissimo register consists of the incredibly high notes that exist above the normal key structure of the saxophone. Usually when a player hits those notes, it sounds like a screech. But because of Desmond's setup and his intense physical control over his airway, he could hit those piercing high notes and make them sound like a gentle whistle.
But here is the breaking point in the narrative, because the Brubeck Quartet is playing massive arenas at this point, and the sheer volume required to fill those stadiums, I have to imagine that was just suffocating Desmond's whisper aesthetic. He probably had to blow way harder just to be heard over the room.
Oh, it was a real crisis for him. If he stayed exclusively in those stadium environments, he risked losing the very signature tone he had spent his life engineering. He needed oxygen. He needed musical settings that didn't have the heavy, rhythmic density of Brubeck's piano.
Which leads me to pose a question to you, the listener. Have you ever found that stepping away from your main, highly successful day gig to do a quiet passion project on the side actually reveals a deeper layer of your true talent? Because Desmond starts sneaking away to do these intimate side projects, and they are complete revelations.
They really are. His most celebrated solo work was his studio partnership with the guitarist Jim Hall. Between 1959 and 1963, they produced absolute masterpieces of chamber jazz and bossa nova, albums like First Place Again, Take 10, and Bossa Antica.
So what was it about Jim Hall's guitar that worked so much better for Desmond than Dave Brubeck's piano?
Space. Pure space. A piano is a percussion instrument with 88 keys, right? It can easily eat up all the harmonic frequency in a room. The guitar is much thinner, acoustically. And Jim Hall was also a minimalist. He would strum a chord and just let it ring, leaving these massive gaping holes in the music.
And Desmond could fill them.
Yeah, Desmond finally had the space to weave his saxophone through those holes without fighting to be heard.
He was so dedicated to these comfortable, low-stress environments that in 1971, when Jim Hall invited a semi-retired Desmond to play a residency at the Half Note Club in New York, Desmond joked that he only took the gig because the venue was close to his apartment. He said it allowed him to just tumble out of bed to work.
Which is such a Desmond thing to say. He constantly used humor to deflect from how seriously he actually took the art. Beyond Jim Hall, he recorded these mind-blowing contrapuntal duets with baritone saxophonist Jerry Mulligan. He did later collaborations with the Canadian guitarist Ed Bickert and even trumpet legend Chet Baker.
Wow.
And all of these projects really relied on his core philosophy, which was active listening. He treated improvisation like a late-night conversation over drinks. He was never trying to outplay you, He was listening to what you said and offering a thoughtful musical reply.
Which transitions us perfectly to his life offstage, because his conversational playing style was a direct reflection of who he was in New York City. He was this fiercely intelligent, humorous bon vivant. He held court at Elaine's on the Upper West Side, hanging out with writers, reading Jack Kerouac.
Oh, his self-deprecating wit is legendary. I mean, he constantly joked that he had won prizes as the world's slowest alto player, or that he won a special award in 1961 for quietness.
I love that. He even started writing an episodic memoir about his life on the road with Brubeck, didn't he?
He did, and the title of that unfinished memoir is brilliant. It was called How Many of You Are There in the Quartet?
Because that's the exact question confused airline gate agents would ask them when they checked in for flights. It's so good. He had a brilliantly quick literary mind. Like, there's this famous story where he sees his ex-girlfriend walking down the street on the arm of a wealthy older man, and Desmond quips, "There she goes, not with a whim, but a banker."
Right, a phenomenal spoonerism of T.S. Eliot's, not with a bang, but a whimper.
So clever.
Very. But as charming as he was, there is a profound, almost tragic contradiction to how he lived his life.
Yeah, let's get into the darkness because it is stark. He was a confirmed bachelor, known to avoid permanent attachments, and he lived an incredibly fast, damaging lifestyle. He chain-smoked Pall Malls, drank heavily, specifically Dewar's Scotch, and he had lifelong substance dependencies.
Yeah.
The sources say he used amphetamines heavily in the 1940s and 50s, and then cocaine in the 70s. The touring drained him so badly he sometimes literally needed vitamin B12 injections just to stand on stage.
It is the ultimate paradox of his life.
I have to stop the show for a second, just process this. He is playing the most relaxing, pristine, dry martini jazz imaginable. This is music that lowers your heart rate just by listening to it.
Right.
But his bloodstream is flooded with amphetamines and heavy liquor.
Yeah.
How does that neurological disconnect even work?
Well, it speaks to how he used substances, not to let go, but to hyper-focus. For Desmond, amphetamines likely provided the intense mental stamina required to constantly edit his playing in real time. Remember, he is composing paragraphs on the fly.
Oh, so he has to be sharp.
Exactly. He needs to see 3 measures ahead so he knows exactly which notes not to play. And the alcohol likely calmed the physical nerves of the stimulants. He essentially internalized all the physiological chaos so that his output on the horn could remain perfectly, obsessively pristine.
Wow. And even when that lifestyle finally caught up to him, his dark humor survived. When he was diagnosed with lung cancer, he got his liver test results back from the doctors, who basically told him it was surprisingly fine. Desmond joked, "Pristine, perfect, one of the great livers of our time, awash in Dewar's and full of health."
That's just classic Desmond. And he kept playing as long as he could. He played his final concert with Brubeck in February 1977, hiding his declining health from the public. He died a few months later, on May 30th, 1977.
He was only 52 years old.
Yeah, far too young.
But his eccentricities carried right over into his will, because he left his beloved Selmer saxophone not to a museum, but to Dave Brubeck's son, Michael. And he left his massive Baldwin grand piano to the owner of a Greenwich Village piano bar, Bradley Cunningham. But he built a practical joke into the bequest, right?
He did. Cunningham actually had to figure out how to physically hoist the piano out of Desmond's apartment to claim it.
Just a final laugh for his friends.
Yeah. But he paired that joke with one of the most quietly impactful acts of philanthropy in music history. He left all future copyright proceeds and royalties of Take 5 to the American Red Cross.
Talk about the ultimate mic drop. That single bequest has generated millions upon millions of dollars for disaster relief across the globe.
Truly. And if we synthesize his legacy, I think Desmond proved that true virtuosity doesn't require shouting to be heard. He demonstrated that leaving a massive, enduring mark on the world is sometimes about the profound impact of the space you leave empty and the notes you choose not to play.
I couldn't agree more. We have journeyed from a chaotic, unstable childhood in San Francisco through the friction of stadium jazz to a man who left an indelible, dry, martini-flavored mark on global culture and philanthropy.
It's been quite the ride.
It has. Which leaves you with a final thought to mull over. In our modern world, a world that is obsessively driven by volume, speed, algorithm chasing, and aggressive self-promotion, what would happen if you applied Paul Desmond's philosophy to your own life? What would your version of pure, lyrical, and quiet virtuosity look like?
That is definitely a question worth taking 5 to think about, because sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the only one we actually remember.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. We will catch you next time.